Can we start?
Yeah, I'm fine. Start.
Dr. Binte, you need to unmute. We can't hear you.
Yeah, it's okay. Sorry.
Yeah, now we can.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I hope I'm audible properly.
Yeah, you're absolutely audible.
Great. So thank you, Sanjeev ji and Vinti ji. Thanks for the time. In fact, such a short notice.
That's fine.
Yeah, and thanks for the audience also for the time. That probably on Saturday, busy Saturday, and again, people only who are joining, have a lot of inclination towards learning. That much I can say. I think it's almost a month back we started this series, and we have around 4 last fantastic episodes. So we had Dr. Colonel Ram Athawale ji, we had Dr. Rahul Bhargava ji, we had Sri Brijesh Singh ji, IPS, IG, Maharashtra Police, and the last episode, it was surprising, we had Suresh Prabhu ji, Honorable Parliament, Rajya Sabha, and we had Mr. Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi, MP of New Zealand. So he is the first Indian who got selected and elected in New Zealand Parliament. So we had some brilliant session. And the 5th episode is we are happy to host you, Sanjeev ji and Dr. Binti. Well,
Hello.
yeah, I'm audible, right?
Yeah. I just thought that briefly we lost you, but that's fine.
Okay. So I'll just quickly introduce you both, and definitely would request you to say a few words about you. So the Sanjeev ji, I was just going through your profile, just to give you something. Last 2.5 months, probably our day start with your message in the DSS group.
Right.
Before wife comes and says good morning, the message of you gets received. So it's सब सुबह आदत पड़ गई है. सुबह उठ के आपकी मैसेज है, नंबर देखते हैं पहले कोविड का क्या है. Thank you. It's a lot of hard work, and I really give a lot of applause for that. So for the audience, Sanjeev Srivastava, he has a lot of vast corporate understanding, and he possesses the entrepreneurship blood. But definitely on another side, he's an academician as well. So he is the Chief Executive Officer at the Entrepreneurship School and a faculty member of the Entrepreneurship, Innovation and Design Thinking at the same TES. He has taught courses in entrepreneurship, innovation and strategy in institutes like, the premier institutes, we say MDI Gurgaon, FMS Delhi University. He is an alumnus of IIT Delhi and has done higher study from the Cranfield School of Management, UK. I would request Sanjeev ji if you can say a few kind of words, or probably something you want to talk about the work you are doing in DSS and other stuffs. It will be great.
Right. So Amitabh, first of all, sincere thanks for calling me and to have me. I think I really admire the work that Ashwin and Hardik and the entire team, Sapio team, which is doing in terms of crowdsourcing the knowledge pool. And I have been tracking this for, call it in the last week of March when all the things started happening. And I've seen a lot of good stuff happening there in terms of policy prescriptions, studies, suggestions, pushing the policy front, helping people out. So, there have been instances when people at other forums have, or even here reached out that can we have PPE kit suppliers, or can someone help with plasma and all that. I think every help rendered, the credit goes to Hardik and his team for this work. Because if this forum was not there, perhaps people would not have articulated that need there. And then, hats off to everyone else who agreed to pull and join hands in this initiative. I'm enjoying this bit.
Thank you, Sanjeev ji. I'll quickly introduce Dr. Binti. Dr. Binti is an acclaimed academician. She is the current professor at Sharda University. She teaches economics and international business. She has specialization in economics, finance, and data analytics. Dr. Binti has worked extensively on the several research projects on state finance, autonomous bodies, microfinance, health communication, early childhood development, maternity health, primary education, health financing, child marriage, livelihood, immunization, and human rights in business. Dr. Binti also possesses expertise on AMEL system and impact evaluation studies. Probably one of the best part that she is an active supporter of the research for a purpose and therefore regularly carries out research studies with a public interest focus, especially pertaining to the academics and the student community, where our heart lies. Right now, she is currently coordinating with the community engagement. Another very interesting thing where I personally, like always have been, been associated, and the social responsibility program of Sharda University across the school of Sharda University. She is also the founder of Citizen Eco-Finality. I think there's a brilliant and fantastic name. There's a lot of thought process might have gone behind it, I can say. It will be great if you can quickly say about you and definitely a few words about your initiative, Citizen Eco-Analytics. When I was going through research, so one of the brilliant name I found across.
Okay, so basically I've actually had two lives. One, I started off, primary background was in academics, where I was a typical economics and finance professor. But somewhere along, a couple of years back, I decided to take a detour, and I actually ventured straight into the non-profit sector. And so with a background in data analytics, which is mostly in terms of program evaluation and monitoring and evaluation systems. So I set out to work with a variety of non-profits, and I've actually worked with a considerable number of them. And so very recently, I have actually sort of moved back to academics, but again, my profile is still very much the same because I'm still working on community initiatives. And so Sharda University typically has 14 different schools across medical, dental, engineering and stuff. So basically the idea is to ensure the student community and the faculty community are closely aligned to the community. And so we are carrying out a lot of research projects within the community, which means going to the villages as well as dealing with a variety of stakeholders. So that is the program that I sort of manage. It's a requirement by the Ministry of HRD that all universities have an active program of social responsibility. And so Sharda University has actually taken this extremely seriously, and they want to sort of make it as one of the best practices, and that is the reason why they have requested me to be on board. As far as the Citizen Eco-Finalitics is concerned, because I had a background in economics, finance, and analytics, and I realized that most citizen initiatives require an amalgamation of all three of them. So without having all these three, you really cannot have a very robust citizen engagement initiative. So this is something that's like a brainchild, which I started last year. And so under this banner, I basically carry out a lot of research initiatives, which are mostly public initiatives. And the two recent ones that I'm carrying out are basically with experiences of students with online learning, and the other one with respect to the RWS COVID preparedness. So these are the two research initiatives that right now we are doing. That's about it.
Thank you. Just to give you a quick update for the audience and you, this video is going to be recorded, the session. It's not only that academicians or the industry experts are going to record this video. This video is also going to be shared across the schools which are under the Atal Innovation of Niti Aayog. So the school children are also going to watch it. I have a small special note of thanks for our supporters in NMIMS, IIT Kharagpur, Radcliffe Life Science and the European Medical Association, International Association of Medical, Basic and Social Scientists, Dronalaya and UPCO, a PSU set up by Government of UP. So before we start, so I have a sincere request to both of you, since you, me and Sanjeev ji both, belong to higher education, and we know the most toughest part is to explain the simplest way without using jargons and all. Since this video is going to be shared across the schools also, and I know, seeing your background, I can always, put my request that, try to have this session very, very simple and, easy to comprehend, so that even the school children also can understand. Because otherwise, majority of the webinars, what is happening is all jargons. So, public start it, then switch off and go away. So that will be my humble request. Sanjeev ji, I think we are on same page.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Here we go with my first question. So COVID-19 has hit world badly. So you all are reading about it and we all are concerned. And everybody nowadays is expert, unfortunately. Lockdown has confined millions of citizens to their homes, shut down business, and seized almost all economics activity. If I go by the report of the IMF, the global economy is expected to shrink by over 3% in 2020, whereas the other report is saying it's going to be shrink by 1%. In terms of number, it's 1 and 3, but it's huge. You know it better. So my question is, the way situation is moving, where do you see the world economy is moving? Do you see that the shrink is going to hit badly? You see, no, it's okay. We can revive, quickly. What's your thought? So I'll be pertaining to the question both. Probably we can start with Sanjeev ji.
Okay. So Amitabh, thanks for this question. And as we are all aware that COVID has impacted all the economies of the world, it's all pervading 200 countries impacted. And every country is going to, is facing with this problem of social distancing and lockdown. Right, so increasingly, countries are taking a stand or trying to figure out that if lockdown is working or not, but social distancing still will remain. Which means that the pace at which work would be conducted prior, it wouldn't be conducted at the same pace tomorrow. Which essentially means that the global economy or the economic transactions are going to slow down. Right. So there are various estimates. IMF has come up with this estimate of 3%, which was in the month of this estimate of IMF is about a month, more than a month back. What I understand, and increasingly, as people are aware, 2, 3, 4 months down the COVID cycle. People are expecting, and most experts are expecting, the global economy to shrink by around 5%, right? So there is a OECD report which expects the global economy to shrink by around 5%. Then there are various other agencies which are estimating coming to that number. And if you look at a few, countries, so the biggest is United States, where there has been severe job losses. They employ about 160 million people on a standard basis if the economy was doing fine. Today, they are working with about 140 million, so about 20 million job losses, right? Look at Europe, for example, France, Spain, Italy, severely affected. Germany was affected, but it has recovered well. UK has been severely affected. And all these countries, the estimate of economic shrinkage is in the tune of 10 to 12%, right? So two large economic blocks shrinking, contracting severely. Then the next 3 blocks are China. And China, where it all started, but China's still, everyone expects China to clock a positive rate of growth, not 7% or 6% that they clocked in the last few years. So China will clock about 1%. Japan is going to shrink. India is going to shrink. India is going to shrink actually massively because of a very severe lockdown that was followed. So my own estimate of India's economic shrinkage is about 10%. So India has not been as badly affected as compared to Europe or United States or Brazil and those sort of countries. But because we took lockdown, we undertook lockdown measures which were far more hard, it has impacted economy severely, and that's the kind of impact that we see. So net, most big economies are going to shrink except Japan. Maybe Indonesia is looking positive. Bangladesh is looking positive. There could be few, silver linings in the entire economic landscape. So some parts of Africa, maybe Nigeria, but most economies are going to shrink. So that's the hard, fact. Now, the question is, if this shrinkage or reduction in economy is going to be for a longer haul, or by next quarter. So if we meet again in September, then we sort of get a feeling that economy is on the uptick. Now that is anyone's, a lot of people again have, forecasts and estimates which are which has been undertaken. Now, two scenarios are important in this context. One is if there is a second wave, right? And already, as I look at United States data, I have a feeling that we are at the cusp of second wave, at least in the United States and maybe some parts of Europe. If there is a second wave, then this whole thing prolongs. The second, which is completely economic and which can make this economic pain harder, is the amount of liquidity available in the system, and this is to do with banks and issues like old loans turning into non-performing loans. So that is given. Now, banks so far have been they have not been very forthcoming with their estimates of how much of these loans are going to become NPLs or NPAs. But from far, people like us, they can look at the gross numbers and they can make some projections. My understanding is that in Q3 of call it the last quarter of this year, October, November, December, or even last part of Q2, which is the next quarter, which is coming July to September, I think this pain is going to come and hit very hard. So that is the background in which we are operating. At the moment, the global economy is negative. The question that we must be asking is this negative economy, call it recession, going to prolong and move into next year? Right? Because if it moves into next year, and if next year becomes negative, then we can say that we are in a depression. So that is the broad macro picture that I'm able to see.
Great. Dr. Binti, your views, please.
So as far as the statistics are concerned, I mean, it's obviously that there has been a great, lockdown in terms of, the businesses, economies. And so we are definitely, the world is definitely getting into a recession. So much is going to depend in terms of how far we're actually going to get a vaccination. Now, right now, in terms of peaks of COVID, okay, so if you look at the trajectory, so different nations have had different peaks. So they are all not peaking at the same time. There are different trajectories of peaking. So depending on the peak, then, how each of the economies are going to, sort of get out of it, it's going to be a slow, protracted process. So I don't see anything positive happening for the next 2 quarters at least, given what I'm seeing in terms of the health and in terms of the economy and in terms of the cash flow, in terms of the stock exchanges. And as I said, it really depends on how far we can get a vaccination and how far each of the economies are going to be able to control the COVID pandemic in their respective countries. So far as India is concerned, there is definitely the growth estimates have been revised to a contraction of around 5%. And I think overall, they are expecting that, the first quarter they have already negative growth of 3%. And all the rating agencies have revised their growth estimates for India considerably down. And even for the next 2020-21, we are not definitely expecting any positive growth. So even if we are assuming that, maybe in the next quarter, the growth starts coming up, but I still feel that, it will really very much depend on how fast we can control the pandemic. Because without the growth, the control of the pandemic, demand is down. There are some supply issues, but demand is definitely down. And with the kind of the Indian economy that we have, with a lot of workforce, which is a lot in the unorganized sector where people have lost jobs and the industry doesn't seem to be able to produce. So till the demand doesn't really rise up, I'm going to see that this growth isn't really going to happen. So I just definitely feel, the feeling that I get is that, the next couple of quarters are going to be very difficult. The world is definitely into a recession. India definitely so, and but it's still very hard to predict what exactly is going to happen. And again, I'll come back to the same thing, is that till the time we are not very clear as to what the vaccination is going to come like, and how far the countries are going to collaborate to sort of ensure that it reaches down to each and every country. Because if you are in a networked economy, it really pays for all nations to be networked and to actually ensure that the cost of the vaccination are kept down as minimum as possible, because any one affection in any one country basically spreads to every other country. So it really is going to be a very collaborative effort for all nations to decide on how they are going to take and ensure that the economy, world economy functions. And as far as India is concerned, we are still, in terms of testing, I think we are still lagging behind. So there is a lot that needs to be done to sort of improve growth. There are particular sectors which are definitely need a lot of attention, which is MSME, the construction, electricity. NPAs are really high. The banking sector is in a mess. So those are things which require a little bit more initiatives, more policy decisions for things to really take up. That's all from my side.
Thank you. Before pandemic, so my next question is also for you only. So before pandemic, we used to talk a lot about the 5 trillion economy of India. But if I see the statistics which is coming from both of you plus IMF and all, the data is scary. There was a fantastic, so even if I go about that 5 trillion economy we can achieve, whether probably in a year or probably 3 years or 10 years down the line, there was a fantastic debate happened in parliament where Chidambaram ji had a fantastic example how the power of compounding works. Now, power of compounding will only work if all the segment, you rightly mentioned, right from SME to everything is actually contributing properly. Now, if I go by the statistics, all sectors are hit, and definitely our 5 trillion economy is also affected. But the question is how much? What is your thought on it?
So this 2024 target of a 5 trillion economy was very, very ambitious, to be said in any case. So even if the COVID pandemic had not hit us, it was very difficult to reach it.
Interesting.
Okay, so it required a lot of tinkering around with the economy. There are a lot of sluggishness. There are a lot of blockages in some particular sectors, which really need a lot of hard work. Okay, so agriculture hasn't been doing great. Okay, the banking sector, financial sector, the NPAs have been rising. Even the non-banking financial companies, if you look at them, their ability to give credit has considerably eroded. The construction sector, which is a great employment generator, is not doing well. Okay, the housing industry obviously is, and the real estate is obviously therefore also very much affected. And the MSME sector is is one sector which provides a lot of employment. Now, if you really go by demand and supply, now see, the economy functions by demand and supply. Okay, so sometimes there are supply considerations which are more of a problem, and there are demand considerations which are also a problem. So right now what I feel is that there are supply issues. Okay, our MSME sector, for all you are concerned with, their we say small is beautiful, but that small isn't very competitive. Okay, the small has a lot of inefficiency. They are struggling. They have financial issues. They have mentoring issues. They have IPR issues. They have technology issues. They have issues with related to having good management. So those are basically related to supply. Okay, that is and of course credit is a very big one. But the fact is that you do not have purchasing power. And if you do not have purchasing power, despite all the supply, incentives that you may give in terms of, ease flow of credit, till the demand does not take off, it's going to be very difficult. So right now the confidence is really down. People do not have purchasing power. So until unless that does not revive, and that rural economy, and which is, as I said, the bulk of the purchasing power does not increase, I don't see how we can really even forget about a 5 trillion economy. I would be just happy if we can get a consistent 5% year-on-year growth for the next 3 or 4 years. I would be extremely happy if you could do that.
Great. I'm taking the clue from your question that you are talking about the purchasing power. Now, if I go by the logic that the purchasing power is severely hit right now, the question for Shivesh is that do you see that recession 2.0 is coming?
So, Amitabh, I think we are already in recession. So there's no question of not being in recession, right?
What is expecting? Unfortunately,
officially, it will get declared in September, right? Because it is defined as 2 quarters when there's negative growth. So we are in a recession, and look, the situation is challenging in terms of demand side. The demand has been shrunk. People have lost jobs. Until the time you provide incomes in the hands of people, the pickup in demand is going to be very challenging. So in this month, for example, in the month of June, at this stage, there are some conversations around, is there a pickup, or are we able to see green shoots in the economy, right? And there is a mild pickup, but this is the pent-up demand which was there for the last 2 months. People had postponed, they had not done purchases, they've moved out, they burned their fuel and all that. So something of that sort has happened. But is it sustainable? Chances are very low, because consider this, in the formal sector of economy, I would imagine, and this is from my conversations, right? Nearly 80% of the people, they have seen salary corrections, right? So correction means it has gone down. Now, number two, we saw this massive migration of people from large centers to smaller, back home to villages, wherever they were, which means again, there is a loss of job and loss of income. Now, unless this is replenished in any ways, the demand is not going to pick up. So today we expect that Prime Minister is going to announce another package for jobs for people who have moved back. Now, and that's expected to be in the region of 50,000 crores. 50,000 crores for an economy whose size is 2 lakh crore, the scale difference is too huge. And till the time you make create commensurate package, not of the nature of the 20 lakh package that we got last month, which was completely on the supply side. On the demand side, unless the right package is introduced, I'm not able to see any pickup.
Dr. Binti, you are also in the opinion, we are right now under a recession, or probably you say that recession is coming?
We are already in recession.
So you're on same page.
Yeah,
Nobody is accepting.
Yes, we are definitely in recession, because if you have the GDP growing, by 2 successive quarters, then you are officially, even by the textbook definition, you are in recession. So yes, there is no doubt about it that you are in recession. So I don't think, anybody would, would sort of, have deviate from this particular stand. But the question is now how long we are going to be in recession. How is it, what is the way forward? I think that is really more important. So it seems the government is actually waking up to the fact that it needs to be build up demand. So I think they have announced a slew of measures in terms of putting money in the hands of people. So they've expanded the scope of Manrega, which is now instead of 100 days of work, they've expanded to 150 days of work. And there is a PM Garibi Hatao Yojana, which is also sort of they're ramping it up. And so basically the idea is to sort of improve, increase employment opportunities in the rural area, so that sort of demand kickstarts. And there is also a lot of initiative in terms of ensuring that nobody goes hungry. So providing food, so that so that collapse of the system does not happen. So there are some steps that are being taken. So it's slow, but it's coming. Okay, and similarly, as far as the couple of industries which I have been talking to, so slowly the migrants are being also encouraged to come back. Now, obviously, it's not going to be easy because with some of the labor laws, I mean, there can be still a debate in terms of whether they it was good that they were sort of done away with, or so there is still debate is still out, because it's at the end of the day it's about competitiveness. But the fact is that it is not going to be so easy now to get labor. So now they have to be encouraged to get back. And I see some of the industries are actually trying to sort of ease back the labor. So these are small steps in the right direction, and with some of the policy measures being taken by the government. But still, I think if you are looking in terms of doing a lot of import substitution, and if you are trying to say that you want to be self-sufficient, there is a lot that needs to be done. Okay, so it is not just the flow of credit, but I think as far as the MSME sector is concerned, which as I said, I keep stressing on that fact, is because, if you want to increase demand, you want to increase, production on a little rapid scale and improve employment, I don't see any other way except go to the MSME. And even if you look at the MSME sector, you will find that if you look at the composition, you will see the small and tiny is the major part of it. So what you really need to do is look at that aspect of that MSME sector and see how that pain can be eased, how they can be sort of pushed. Okay, because that is where the growth is going to. So, when you talk about the bottom of the pyramid, I think even in the MSME, you will have to talk about the bottom of the pyramid now. And which means a lot of mentoring, a lot of digital training, a lot of entrepreneurship, all these a lot of technology inputs, a lot of advice, and maybe, I don't know, but this is for experts to sort of talk about it. But whether we need certain barriers in terms of anti-dumping measures, those are things that also maybe the government may need to consider to sort of give a heads up to our industry. But as I said, this question is best left to experts for that to answer. So I probably leave the answer to Shivesh to answer this one. As far as measures for anti-dumping measures.
Yeah, thank you. Before I go to Sanjeev ji, message for the audience: you can start writing the questions in the chat section. My humble request is try to avoid any kind of controversial question. Let's stick to the fundamental of the learning. Let's try to utilize the platform for maximum of the learnings. Even if you put any kind of controversial question will be picked up. So please write the question kind of within the scope. Sanjeev ji, the measures that Dr. Bente is talking about, the steps are brilliant, and those steps, if we get taken properly with a proper implementation, probably this is going to be fantastic for India 2.0. What is your thought? Do you want to see, or probably you want to add anything that because end of the day, if I take the economical model, as he was rightly mentioning, that the pyramid, if I take the economical model as a pyramid model, end of the day, bottom of the pyramid is not having the liquidity, nothing will happen. In fact, Dr. Abhijit Banerjee is also talking a lot about this kind of bottom of the pyramid, the liquidity, garibo ke haath mein paisa dena hai and all. So what is your thought? What should be the way forward right now?
Okay, so Amitabh, one basic point that I want to bring, when we think in terms of MSME, I would say, in my mind, MSME has a larger service sector proportion as compared to manufacturing sector. That is how the Indian economy is structured. So for example, India has roughly about 50 crore employed people. Out of those 50 crore employed people, about let's say 22 crore are in agriculture, and balance 28 crore are in multiple sectors of economy. Manufacturing accounts for about 5 crore out of balance 28 crores. So still there are 22 or 23 crore people who are employed in other sectors of economy, and mostly services. So what are these other sectors? So these could be trade, transport, hotels, construction, IT, and those sort of stuff. Now, when I mention trade, transportation, hotel, construction, these 4 sectors are grossly impacted, right? So no restaurants are working, even small dhabas are not working for some, quirk of law and everything. We have put everything under shutdown. Now, unless you allow these businesses to open up, so we have allowed transportation to happen, but we have not allowed restaurants or dhabas to start functioning, right? And we really need to think why these decisions have been taken, right? So sometimes we take decisions. Some decisions make sense, some does not. And in my mind, it does not make sense. And rapidly, very quickly, we must open up these sectors for all these people who are working in these sectors. And that's about 7-8 crore people. They can come back to jobs and slowly they start working when demand picks. They are, so it's what comes first is always a challenge, but bring them back to their jobs. You have stopped them from coming to jobs by law, right? And that must be quickly, annulled. So focus on service sectors, focus on all the things which are possible. So manufacturing, when we talk in terms of Atmanirbhar, immediately the image which conjures is of manufacturing happening in India. So mobile phones, we don't make mobile phones, are imported from China or Taiwan or other countries or even US. And then you want to say that we want to make mobile phones here, right? So that's one part of Atmanirbharta. But we don't realize that India today is one of the largest exporter of services globally. Right? And that's our strength. So focus on that and earn foreign exchange dollars, because it's going to be competitive. Bangladesh is giving us competition. Philippines is giving us competition. Thailand is giving us competition. So there are countries, it's not an easy world, right? So there will be countries who will keep us giving competition in the domain areas of our strength. And we really need to focus and ensure that we do not lose that piece of pie, because if we start losing that piece of pie, because that piece of pie globally is shrinking in a recessionary world, right? So it's going to be a cost and service-led model, and someone has to really, at economic level, at association level, these issues need to be thought through, deliberated, and a national strategy needs to be created. So Atmanirbharta, in my mind, is on the manufacturing side, where a lot of thinking is there, that we start making stuff here, and we can look at industry by industry and say that, okay, we are self-sufficient in cement, we are good in automotive, but we are not good in mobile phones, so we attract mobile phones, right? So we are not good in high-tech electronics, we start building capabilities for high-tech electronics. So that's one piece of homework. But focus on services, and service export market is going to expand all the more, because every country is going to struggle. Every country is looking for cheaper ways of doing business, and COVID is fundamentally resetting the way we are going to live our lives. So knowledge creation, for example, today is happening the way you, me, and Dr. Vinti, we are interacting, and it's being shared by everyone. It is very different from the old economy ways when knowledge creation would happen, that we would sit in a hotel and we're doing seminar and 100 people would be attending, which is a cost-heavy model, right? So digital, video, all those are the things, telecom, all those things are going to happen in a bigger way. The question for us is, are we doing enough to build those capabilities and then to attract customers?
So Sanjeev ji, you talked beautifully on the Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, if I go back couple of years back, so we have been talking about Make in India, we have been talking about Startup India, and now this terminology has come, Atmanirbhar. Only it's a translation of English to Hindi, but your fundamentals remain same.
Right.
It can only be possible if the entrepreneurs get the proper support. The question is for you, because you also run a launchpad for the startup ecosystem. So if I see pre-COVID era versus post-COVID era, there must be a lot of difference in terms of support, in terms of structure, in terms of funding and all. So how do you see that?
Look, I think people are coming to terms with a new reality. So when you look at startup world, pre-COVID, everything was around funding and everything was around a hypothetical term called GMV, right? So if you understand gross merchandise value, it was nothing to do with below the line profitability, right? So I think this whole premise of which was there for the last 10 years, last decade, in terms of startup world, that investor invests and the job of a startup is to go and make it, scale it up so big and think about profit later, right? So now every investor will come to value mode. Unit cost economic becomes the norm of the day, and that is the basis on which most fundings would be awarded. And that correction was long overdue in the startup world, right? So all the things that we had phenomenal loss-making startups. It was good to fail and to do $1 billion failure, right? Now that ability in investors have severely diminished in the post-COVID, because the economic surplus available in all economies have gone down, and it will go down because companies are producing less profits, less tax collection, and everything. So everyone is getting hit hard on the returns. Now in this scenario, if I have to start up, if anyone has to run a startup, the sooner they start focusing on unit cost economics and then scale, perhaps those are the startups which are going to attract more quality investors. Ultimately, the blood of any business is in getting, the lifeblood of any business is in getting as much of customer funded money, which makes it self-sufficient. So post-COVID, there are a number of new opportunities which are emerging, right? So all the things that I was doing pre-COVID, maybe some guys have to say that it's not going to work anymore. But these new opportunities have come, and if I have those skill sets and capabilities in which I can bring those skill sets and capabilities to new opportunities, then perhaps I can build a new venture. A lot of old ventures are going to really close shop. It's not going to work. And that realization has to come. Now, as far as what governments can do, I think government has to be very agile. So government only works at policy level, right? And in policy level, government, like Make in India, like Startup India, like Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? So we have been very good at creating schemes. But I think it's very important to fund these schemes adequately to allow those credit or finances available which can be deployed in startup. For example, government wanted to create a fund for startup for 10,000 crore. I'm yet to see any deployment from that fund of fund, right? Not even maybe 500, not even 100 or maybe 200 crore has been deployed out of 10,000 crore. So sooner we reach those, we build those organizations which are able to deploy those money, only then India can see the benefits of new age startups which are going to come.
Great. So if I see the startups pre-COVID versus post-COVID, so definitely the startups who are coming post-COVID, they will be having a different set of challenges. But the pre-COVID, those who have already started, everybody is not having a super cash flow. The cash flow are getting dried up.
It's already dried up.
Yeah, it's many measured days. It's a month or so, it's getting dried up.
Yeah.
So how to deal with this cash crunch right now? I'll be having both of your views.
Okay, so very quickly, I just want to make a point. So look, we are in the third month of COVID, right? It's nearly 90 days. Today we are on 20th June, right? So in these 3 months, my assessment is a lot of garage ventures, as we call them. So they are very small businesses, small startups which operate out of basements and those sort of places. A lot of these ventures have already shut down. That's the hard fact. And they shut down because, the cash flows dried up. They didn't have money to even pay the rents, pay salaries, etc. So I'm able to see a lot of people, a lot of old teams getting dismantled or broken away. Now, how much? I have my own, call it a rule of thumb, which we call it 40-40-20. 20 have already vanished, right? 40 will survive. Now, the question is, will the balance 40, how much of that we can salvage? And that is the place where policymakers have to intervene to ensure that if we can salvage those 40. My sense is out of those 40, already 10 is gone. So 30% of businesses, small businesses, they already shut.
Dr. Binti.
So, I mean, I come first. I completely agree with what Shivesh is saying regarding the services aspect of the MSME, and also the fact is the lack of funding in the startup sector, and also the fact a lot of garage enterprises have failed. Okay, now if you look at the business model that was there and that worked in the past, the sense that I get is that in the new post COVID era, I think the business model really needs to be tweaked. Okay, which means that probably you will have to spend a lot more in terms of trying to find out where is the market. So market intelligence is probably going to be a key requirement as to first finding out whether there is a certain requirement of that particular one or particular product or service that you are going to offer in the post-COVID era. So because I also get a sense is that pre-COVID and post-COVID, the lifestyles, the requirements, the tastes, a lot of things, the way of living, the way of doing business, everything is going to change. So I see a lot of people have taken opportunity in terms of the post-COVID, in terms of doing a lot of, innovations in terms of looking at technology and products which are geared for meeting the COVID challenges. So the next step is also now about trying to find appropriate business models to see that, okay, if this post COVID and this kind of a lifestyle is going to sustain. Obviously, the kind of lifestyle that we had in the past is probably not going to sustain, because I also see a lot of businesses actually taking a decision to now permanently work from home. So there are some businesses which have actually done that and said that, I don't know what is going to happen in the future, but for me, I think this is the way to go. And, so the gig economy, as we call it, is probably going to change. So when you have a different model of working, then in terms of the business model that, startups need to adopt is also going to change. So apart from what the cost implications, as Shivesh has rightly very pointed out, I think a lot more focus by funders and investors will also go in terms of looking at, what products and services are going to be offered and how sustainable they are, whether that demand for that product and service is sustainable. And more important, rather than go national, maybe, maybe some of those products and services may have to look at limited area or limited local area functioning, whereby they are catering to some limited areas or limited requirements. So which means that, there will be, instead of having something that is said that, okay, extremely high growth and completely, sold out in terms of very, very rapid expansion, that is probably not going to happen. We'll probably have to, our expectations in terms of, let's say, the growth rate of what you expect a startup to grow, that will probably become a little bit more reasonable.
Can I add something, Amitabh?
Please.
Yeah, and I think I really liked the point Dr. Binti has made. So look, the question is, we all know that, okay, pre-COVID and post-COVID, there is going to be some sort of reset. And I just want to bring some brief points. One point is, we had this unlock 1.2 about 15 days back. And ever since that day, I have been going to my office daily, right? But I sense that there's a lot of lethargy in all the businesses and employees to move out, call it lethargy or fear, that there's something out there, right? And the average level of traffic, at least in NCR on the road, is about 10 to 15%, even in this unlock 2.0 phase, right? So which means that only so much of people are commuting at office time, peak office period. And it is legitimate that this people are realizing that it is okay to work from home. You are wasting a lot of time in commute and all that. And I think that fundamental reset is going to happen. And companies are taking measures to make it happen, make that thing work. Now, what does that mean? If I live in a small locality, right, then earlier from this small locality, I would travel about 20 kilometers or 30 kilometers or 40 kilometers to my office if I was living in urban India or any metro city in India. Now, if this is not happening because this trip has been curtailed, so I live here and then I move essentially around the small area where I live. So a lot of things which is going to happen in the days to come, a lot of services, setups, facilities, entertainment, everything is going to happen around where you live. And those are new opportunities. So for example, co-working places around where you live. So if I need to go to a place where I still need to interact formally with set of people and take printouts and all that, if I'm not able to do at home, I go to this co-working space which is 500 meters away from home, walk down, I just spend an hour, do interviews of people, etc., take printouts, enjoy all those facilities, and then come back. So newer opportunities are going to emerge. It is just for smart guys and girls to sense those opportunities and then to latch onto those, because new form of demand is going to come. And that's perhaps, I like the point that Dr. Vinti made, and that's the opportunity for startups. But, everyone has to take those risks and make those calculated, jumps. And that's all about starting up. That's the fun of starting up. So you sense the opportunity ahead of everyone else, and then you make it work and make it big.
Great. So if I take the points from both of you and try to have a grasp, definitely there were certain expectations. And right now, because of this pandemic hit, right now I can't say expectation, but expectation has already been hit. And it's right now what we have only the predictions. Now, Sapio worked 2 white papers predicting the growth of the economy across sectors, which you are aware, Sandeep ji. And this paper came when the crisis was in the early stage. So if I go by that logic and based on the same, certain recommendations were also provided. So how far or near do you think that Sapio is kind of near to the predictions, or do you think there is a change in the projection numbers?
Okay, so look, we built that model in the first week of April, right? And we built 2 models of economic forecast, and I think we are still doing fine in terms of numbers. Those were early forecasts, and we are up to date as on 15 June, all the indicators, high frequency indicators which have been published. I think the numbers would go downwards just a bit, right? So about 0.5% to 1.5%, that's further down. So we had predicted that the economy would shrink by about 7.5%. Now the model is at 8% to 10%, depending on what scenarios we want to play. I think you had another question. We made certain recommendations, and those recommendations were in the form of, let's say, India to have a new budget, right? And we didn't go for that budget. Instead, we had in the month of May about 5 reform packages under the umbrella of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which was announced. But I can tell you that the government finances are in real terrible shape, right, for want of word. Now, our fiscal deficit numbers, if I do some broad extrapolation and basing it on CGA's numbers of 30th April, I think we are going to breach the fiscal deficit target for the whole of this year by 30th June, right? Which is a scary situation, right? And till the time there is a solid government response, which means that all the budgetary numbers that we gave, they are not going to stand. So till the time the solid government response in terms of solid thinking, which says that we are going to, modify the budget, and budget is a staged process. So there's RE and all the revised estimate and all that, but they come so far back in time. Today, we really need to work and say that this is the way we are going to operate the economy for the next 9 months. And if we come to a firm conclusion that this is the way we are going to operate the economy for the next 9 months, perhaps we can recover some bits of, the degrowth that we are going to have. So that's one challenge. What is interesting is some state governments pick this up. So, for example, as you are aware, Telangana and Andhra, they are creating new budgets, right? And it is the right thing to do. And they, so every state which either they could not present their budget, which was supposed to be presented, either they are presenting or they are trying to redo their budget, because GST collections have been severely hit, right? So we are aware that in the month of April and May, the shrinkage in GST was to the extent of about 50%, 2 months, right? So every month India collects about 1 lakh crore in GST. Last 2 months, we did not even touch 1 lakh combined. So the government tax collections are going to get hit, whether it is central government or state government, and they are drawing a lot of money from RBI, and that, so that's the economic reality. And government needs a serious thinking in terms of how it is going to tackle fiscal deficit. We should not be ashamed to breach the fiscal deficit, and even breach it hard, right? When I say hard, in the sense, even if we go 12%, we should not be really ashamed. Even if we go 13%, we should not be ashamed. It is not going to change the rating agency's view of India. So that's something which has been holding back FinMin for a long time. But, in my assessment, all the rating agencies are aware, and they have factored that bit in when they did, then when some, lowered the rating of India to BB minus, and so all rating agencies, they have done some bit of tweak. But that has already been factored, which means that we must take our step more decisively rather than being hesitant on the fiscal planning.
Great. I have a very smart question from one of the audience. I think that's how our thought process should be. The question is, how can we take advantage of the recession and use it as an opportunity on both personal level as well as the professional level? I think it's open for you both. Anybody want to take it, or both can take it? Whoever wants to go ahead first.
Look, if I have to take an exam, then, I would pass the question to the other person. It's really, it is a tricky question, and, it is hard. Recessions are typically very hard. And I think only those people survive recession who are eternally optimistic, right? So optimism is something which will help you trudge this negative phase of economy. Now, when I say optimistic, it does not mean that I'm always cheerful and all that, right? So when I say optimistic, it means that while being optimistic, I take steps and I take calculated steps which allows me to be on the positive side of the economic line. As long as I remain on the positive side of the economic line, I'm fine, right? And I'm able to see some people do this very well, right? So in the whole of NCR, when this thing came, when COVID came, there were about 1,000 people who seized the opportunity of masks, right? And there are about 10,000 mask suppliers in India today, right? So everyone started making masks. Not 1 lakh people or 100 crore people, they never saw that as an opportunity, but those 10,000 people, they saw that opportunity and they moved very fast. So agility, seizing, looking at the opportunity, being agile, and then seize the opportunity, that is the mantra.
Great. Dr. Binti, you want to add something on it?
So I'm going to answer this question in a slightly different manner. Okay. So one, of course, I agree with Shivesh's, the being of agile and the masks and, dispensers and the sanitizers. I think the recession is a good opportunity to have a relook at the way we are working, right? Our priorities in terms of health, education, and where we are spending our money, because we have now realized that we did not spend enough on health and education. Now, if we had spent on health and education, the crisis that we would have, we are in right now because of a lot of shortages would have not been so acute. I mean, no country can obviously have this kind of preparedness, but I think, some systems, some efficiency, some databases, some interconnection, some ability to work across different states, right? So right now we are still struggling for information and data across hospitals, ventilators, etc., etc. So, that is one thing. Education, right? So education is a double-edged sword. Okay, so one, of course, education. You educate people, they'll ask questions. But the other end is that if you educate people, it was far easier to put a social behavior change communication down in terms of trying to prevent the spread of COVID. So right now, even if the government is spreading a lot of messages, at the bottom level, the message across the populace is not hitting that something is happening, right? So in the villages, the message is that, to use a Hindi phrase, कि ये शहर वालों की बीमारी है, गांव में नहीं आ सकती. So so that is, still the feeling is that, somehow that feeling has not come. And the third thing that I really would like is that, over the past couple of years, the NGO sector has sort of been neglected by the government for various reasons. I mean, there are definitely legitimate reasons for, some of the actions that the government has taken. But in this pandemic, it is the NGO sector which has done a remarkable amount of work in trying to get the migrants, trying to get them to food, trying to get the message across, trying to reach across the villages, because they seem to be having a village network, right, which none of them do. So if you want to sort of revive the village economy, then you will need to look at a business model which looks at NGOs and partnering them in a way which makes a lot of business economic sense, right? So, integrate them as part of one of the parts of, so whether it is in terms of evaluating your own schemes or whether it is in terms of delivery of some of the schemes. I think somewhere along you need to devise a model where, non-profits are there. And the last is, I think, we may do a lot in terms of economic incentives and measures and stuff. I think the most important thing, as far as, because we are all humans, is that we need to be assured that tomorrow is going to be good. Tomorrow is going to be fine, right? So, that is something about business confidence or economic confidence. I think that messaging needs to be, sort of brought out more clearly, and, what communication strategy that we need to use in the recession, so that people will realize that, things are going to, they're bad right now, but, tomorrow is going to be better, and then day after it's going to be even better. So I think that's what I would say, that the recession, really what we can use recession for.
Great. I think people are getting some kind of economic confidence, but I have a very similar question on same line on that economic confidence. I am happy that people are getting optimistic. So the question is, Sensex and Nifty are bouncing on daily basis. So can we consider this as a business on track right now, or probably are bouncing back?
I think I'll let Shivesh take this question.
Okay. So look, I think number one, Sensex stroke Nifty, they correlate very poorly with the economy, because Sensex comprise of 30 stocks, Nifty comprise of 50 stocks, right? And the economic correlation is only, when I look at GDP model, the economic correlation is only about 25%, right? So it could be that those 25% of the economy is doing better than the balance 75% of the economy. So that could be one view. My other view is that if economy in general is not doing well, then how can the balanced 25% do well? Because in general, the demand has been very sluggish in economy, right? And that's the hard truth. And in that sense, I do not see the momentum in Sensex or Nifty to be an indicator of economy. I really think they are overpriced, and in my humble opinion, I could be completely wrong. They are ripe for correction, right? And everything in Sensex or Nifty depends on the earning EPS of those 30 companies or 50 companies. The EPS of all those companies, in my view, in Q1 is going to shrink. So if that EPS is going to shrink, which means the P ratio of Sensex or Nifty is going to be higher than the mean average or whatever, you can use any metric. So in that sense, I would imagine that there's going to be correction. I also imagine correction in terms of what I spoke in my first part, which is going forward. I think in the period starting with August to November, we are going to have a hard phase of Indian economy, right? When banks, they will have to start declaring their losses. They have been insulated from declaring losses till 31st August. But after that, they have to account for all the losses, all the money which has not come to them, which means that the movement of money back into the economy from banking system or FIs is going to, get constricted. And that would be the second, so as I said, two risks. One is if there is a second wave, but that's the economic risk that I am able to see. How much, there are estimates, people say that about 10 lakh fresh NPAs, 10 lakh crore of fresh NPAs have already, occurred in due to COVID. Now that's a huge amount. It is like the NPA crisis that stifled the last government for the 5-year period. So we have a troublesome period looking ahead, and unfortunately Sensex and Nifty does not reflect that position.
Great. So before I park the next question, since it's already 12:06, so honestly the way discussion is happening is super, it's brilliant. We have 3 questions and we can cover all. The way it's happening, if you can, allow me to probably continue maybe 10-15 minutes, we can actually finish it off. So I personally don't want to cut the flow right now. This is happening just brilliantly, but only if you both can 10-15 minutes more with us. Does that work for you both?
Yeah, that's fine.
Dr. Binti?
Yeah,
okay, great. Thank you. My next question is another very nice question. Probably it will go to Dr. Binti. Weak implementation of economic reforms since 2017 is one of the reasons that Moody's determined to downgrade India's rating, if it is true. So his question is, what steps are required to improve this aspect?
What steps are required to?
Improve this aspect, the rating, the Moody's rating.
Okay, so when you look at rating, then you really need to look at, what are the components of that rating, okay, for any rating, okay. So obviously it depends on things like liquidity, interest rates, demand, supply, governance, transparency, business confidence, corruption. So if you look at all these things, right, then obviously the answer is all these things, okay. So if you are looking at improving the rating, then somehow you will have to work on all these things. And going a little step further, I'm also looking at one other aspect which is probably not sometimes looked into, but is also very important, is fiscal federalism also. So based on the some of the work, little work that I had done on the 15th Finance Commission, the state's capacity to spend has been severely affected. Ever since the GST has come, so their revenues have declined. So their ability to spend has got seriously affected, and with bulk of the investment that happens within the state, and both are all state subjects, and if they are not able to spend, then it becomes a big issue. So I think one of the other things that we need to do is also work on more degree of increase in federalism. Right? So both it has to be in terms of political as well as economic. So those are things that I think need to be done to sort of improve ratings. Okay, and of course there are things that which are non-economic and what are more political, but will obviously have an impact on economic, is with regard to some of the things in terms of women's safety, in terms of crime, in terms of lynching, in terms of religious conflicts. So some of these things have also sort of affected the climate, and COVID has obviously been the the last straw on the camel's back. So the way we are handling the COVID and how we are going to handle it, those are other ways that will affect the rating.
Great. So before I park the last question to both of you, there is a question for you, Dr. Binti. One of the steps needed to boost our economy is to skill the unskilled workers.
Okay.
So what skills do you think can be taught to the unskilled workers?
Now, this is a very difficult question because, coming from my background, see, skilling typically starts from the school. Okay. So if you look at experts, they say that, by the time the person has graduated, okay, he becomes virtually unskillable. So the maximum intervention should have been there rightly in terms of when we are giving education at the school level. So basically our reading, writing, science, maths abilities are somewhat fostered in that the school level. So if we are able to improve our education at the school level, that is where the thrust is going to be. So if you see that most of the work that the NGOs seem to be seeing, and many of them actually work, they are actually working on improving school education, because if you improve the foundation, and that is also the reason why we talk about early childhood education, where they say that even that is a very predominant indicator of how you can skill, right? Now, having said that, okay, there has been a lot of skill initiatives that the government has taken, but looking by whatever my experience is, that they haven't really happened. Okay, so some of these skill sector councils, and also the kind of expectation that we had with regard to some of the things that we could have done has not happened. So I think the good idea is probably to sort of team up with the industry and then figure out what their needs are, and then come out with a skilling perspective. So I can tell you about one example that in the post COVID, they said something like training people on how to sanitize places. So that could be like, for example, because this is something that is going to stay for a long time, that not about cleanliness, but using sanitization as one of the skills very critical, because the moment you sanitize workplaces and cars and automobiles and stuff, it reduces the risk of traveling. And when you reduce the risk of traveling, the economy in any case opens up, because people are now more freer to move out, eat. As Shivesh says, that if you are able to sort of those small joints, road joints, hotels. So if there is certain skill level in, let's say, trying to improve the sanitation in those areas, okay, and SOPs for that area, then probably it makes it easier for people to move out, okay. And that's how. So you need to look at skill levels, critical skill levels, which are in very great demand, and which will sort of allow other sectors to also improve. So I mean, sanitization is one particular skill that seems to be really important right now.
In fact, my question is like related to the school only. You were talking about school, you were talking about the sanitization and all. The reason behind asking the question is same. This session is also going to be shared with the school children. So my question is, both of you, do you feel that the students can come out with certain projects? It can be fantastic, innovative, because the reason behind asking, you are seeing the students, you are finding a lot of innovative projects. Sanjay is also giving a lot of launch pads to the kind of entrepreneurs. So I'm sure you might come out with a lot of ideas which can ignite the young minds, right? And the Niti Aayog mentors, the Adult Innovation mentors can definitely guide them accordingly, and probably it can come out to the reality. And it can be anything. It can be technology related, artificial intelligence related. It can be sanitation related. Anything from your side, both of you. And anybody wants to go ahead first.
So I'm already seeing a lot of traction that is happening across schools and colleges and universities. So low cost ventilators, dispensing machines, sanitizers, testing, testing abilities, contactless, delivery of, let's say, delivery of sanitization, cubicles, corridors, and robots. So all this is, it's already happening. And similarly, in terms of some low-cost innovations of how to deliver education, which is because you do not have schools. So, how to also deliver low-cost education without having internet facility. So even those kind of innovations are also being done, and the academic community is also very much part of it. Of course, Shivesh would be working more closely with entrepreneurs, but I see there is a lot of buzz in the campuses that they are trying, and the government also is trying to come up with a lot of schemes, a lot of funds, whereby they are encouraging a lot of universities to come out with innovations to meet the COVID challenges with regard to whatever is needed for the COVID response, and to scale it up faster and with a low cost thing, because it's sometimes very difficult to import it or get it from the outside. And if you can come up with this, and we've had some very good, excellent examples in terms of low cost ventilators and stuff. So those have been very good examples where a lot of IIT Madras and all etc. has come up with those kind of innovations, right? But Shivesh will be able to tell you much better on those lines.
Sanjeev ji.
Yeah, Amitabh, I think we'll need another session for a hard view on education, right? But to keep the message very short, I think it is time where the whole model of education, the way it is structured, it should be broken. And then, first we also need to reimagine, but it really needs to be broken, because this model has not gone change for hundreds of years, right? So what was there? A Montessori system, a school system leading up to, higher secondary or secondary education, and then going to university education. And this was, call it a mass production model of education. Now, at the end of this model, the belief was that you are producing people who would be skilled. And the hard question that the entire stakeholder of this model and other people who are part of this, they have to look, are we producing skilled people at the end of this, right? So that's one hard question that I want to leave everyone, and for a more discussion on that. I really think we are not producing skills, and to produce skills, we need to do things differently. So how would people work in the year 1100 when there was no school, no university and all that, and still they would be skilled to do some work, and they were working in agricultural fields. Kheti karte the, right? That was or they would be sahukars and all that. So whatever they were, so they would be doing some sort of trade. Now, for doing all this, do I need to be an MBA? Right? Which means that the skills can be very modular, and it can be modularly acquired. An acquisition of skill should be liberated. The regulation has to be reimagined, and then allow people to skill, as per market demand. So I don't think even industry has done a great job. They all know what they want, but I'm surprised till date why they have not done anything. Every time when I meet HR managers, they tell me that skill wala banda milta nahi. Bhai, to aapne kya kiya usko skill wale ko lagane ke liye, banane ke liye, right? You should have produced something. So this is not giving result. Now, I can give you certain small experiments which I do, and in multiple manners, in very phased manner. So right now we are working with cohort of school students and turning them into entrepreneurs, right? So they are class 8 to 12 school students, and we are working on projects. And these projects are to help all these guys, boys and girls, launch their own small ventures in 6 to 12 weeks. Now, is it possible? Right? So we still have got about 50% strike rate, right? And I think it is possible. And I realize where all we are failing. So I think if you have to build skills, see things completely. So what skill I get? Reading, writing, arithmetic is the basic skill that everyone gets. So which is there. But after that, it is all practicum. Can you teach kids to code? Can you teach kids to break things? Can you teach kids to make scooters, motorcycles, carts, right? Anything that we need. And we are not teaching enough. So there is less use of hand. There is too much of thinking ability, right? So or thinking skill and etc. So that's my brief take. And I think, as I said, it requires far more greater, open, candid dialogue between all stakeholders. In my view, the model is broken.
Great. Thank you. Shivesh and Dr. Binti, I can see the chat sections. The people are already requesting one more session by you both. So I think it was brilliant. If you both can allow, probably we can have one more session where we can actually talk a lot about sector specific way. because I can see one question is actually a sector specific question on the tourism industry. Right now, this session is more on the macro, so I am not taking up this question. So probably in the next.
Can I just add to? Sorry, Amitabh, and I thought I lost. I think Dr. Vinti is making a great point, and that is the point. We are in a crisis. The economy is in a crisis, and there has to be a methodical way out of the crisis. At the moment, at the country or at policy level, that methodical way is not very clearly visible, right? So US had this, and then Roosevelt came and he gave the New Deal, right? We are looking at the New Deal, and New Deal is not there, right? And it is time where we look at all the hard questions, and there is only one way, long-term way out of this crisis. And that long-term way is to invest in skilling of population. I'm not using the word education. I'm using the skilling of population, wherein we produce people who go through programmatic approaches. And at the end, they are good to do, let's say, construction. They could be masons, they could be builders, they could be electricians, they could be plumbers, they could be fitters, they could be engineers. We have engineers who don't do any engineering. All right. So skilling is something that the New Deal and the new long-term deal has to be around skilling. It can't be anything else.
Thank you. So as I was telling that, there is already a demand for one more session. So once more, गाना गाने के बाद होता है ना audience का. So you have already got some fan base right now from this audience, I can see. I have one question which I am not taking today. It's a sector specific question on tourism, because right now we are talking more on the macro, because you can only talk about micro and the sector specific when your broad skeleton is properly structured. So Amrita Mukherjee has put this question. So Amrita, I will keep you posted on these sector specific whenever we are doing it. Keep following us. You will be getting the links and all. And definitely I'll be reaching out to you both for some another session, definitely. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, Amitabh. This is wonderful.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Ashwin, for the reference, and Hardik, you also. So for the audience, we'll be having some more interesting sessions, definitely with them one more.